So welcome back to Clinical Research Training. I'm Steve Pope, and we're going to be talking about clinical data management systems. Now, up to this point, we've gone over some of the query writing and some of the aspects of how edit checks work and things like that. Now we're going to delve into a little more detail on the clinical data management systems and how they operate, what are some of the key characteristics that you can expect from them, and I think you'll get quite a bit out of that. So to kind of set this up, I've got a little funny video that you can take a look at on YouTube. It's about maybe 2 minutes long. I posted this. You'll find the link in the non-audio version of the presentation that's posted online. So you can just copy that into your browser if you find that the link doesn't work altogether. But like I said, it's about 2 minutes, kind of funny. I think you'll like it. And it'll kind of set the stage for a little bit more about what we're going to talk about. So our learning objectives for this lecture are going to be describe the characteristics and examples of a clinical database, discuss and understand the capabilities of a clinical database, and then explain FDA regulatory requirements of computerized systems. So we'll be talking about a few of the documents, and one in particular regulatory document that we'll talk about that comes from the FDA that regulates some of the computerized systems that we use. So we'll talk in a little more detail about that as we go along. So what is a clinical database? Well, essentially it's going to be the repository of all clinical data that we collect during the course of a clinical trial. So all of the patient data from each of the visits, when patients come in, when they get their vital signs taken, when they have lab results that are recorded on a CRF, all of that is clinical data. And all of that's going to be stored in our clinical database. So we want the data collected to be high quality. So we want it to be error-free. So the query writing exercise that we did in last week's lab helps us accomplish that, helps us get the data as error-free as possible, ensuring that it can be as high quality as possible. And then finally, the data that is in our database is going to be used for statistical analysis to determine the result of our clinical trial. So our clinical database, once we get everything in and we've gone through and it's error-free, then we're going to create a data set that our biostatistics staff is going to analyze and run some statistical analysis on it and determine, how safe and effective the data reveals that our drug is. And then we're going to send that to the FDA or the other regulatory agencies for marketing approval. And once they get it, they're basically going to do the same thing, make sure they can come up with the same analysis that our biostatistics people have come up with. So let's talk about some examples of clinical database. These are some of the products that you're likely to run into once you get started in this field and you start working with the data. A couple products. The first one is Data Labs. It's created by a company called Perceptive, which is actually owned by Parexel, which is one of the larger CROs in the world. A very popular clinical database. Also, Metadata Rave comes from Metadata Systems. It's also very popular, probably one of the most popular clinical database systems out there on the market. Also, Oracle Clinical, which comes from Oracle Development Corporation. Many of you have probably used Oracle products in the past. Oracle's probably the second or third largest software company in the world. And creates an entire platform of relational database products, and one of which is Oracle Clinical, based on their database engine. A fourth one is one called BioClinica. It's produced by a company called BioClinica Corporation, and it's starting to make a lot of headway out there in the CRO world. They have an offering of products that runs in addition to clinical database products that they produce. They have a number of others that also work in our space as well. So these are some of the products that you're likely to encounter out there as you start to work in the field. So some of the common characteristics of these products, they're just like any other database product. They have a front end, which is what the user is going to see, what someone like yourself will see as you use it, as you enter data, and as you close queries and things like that. These will be users that use the product at the clinical site, say a big site like maybe Duke or UNC or the Mayo Clinic. You'll also have people from the sponsor that use it. These will primarily be your data management staff. And these can be people from a CRO as well. They can also include other users such as CRAs or monitors or medical monitors. You'll even have the client, the sponsor themselves, take a look. Some of their folks will take a look at the data as it's in there. And then the other end, you've got the database platform itself, which is usually based on some relational database engine such as Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server, two popular database production languages. So this is kind of the major component, major characteristics of these databases. So some of the things that you're allowed to do with your clinical database, it offers a nice engine for database design that is pretty easy to use. You can also create data entry screens, which are known in our vernacular as electronic data capture, where the user is going to see that screen and enter data into it. It's also going to allow you to create edit checks that we've talked about. Then these are going to run, these are programs inside the database that run on against the data itself and find all of the errors or discrepancies that exist. And then you have a capability of managing these data discrepancies. In other words, they identify themselves. You can then close them. You can send them to the site for clarification, and all of that becomes part of your overall database. And then you've got a method for creating data queries. So as those discrepancies occur, you can send them to the site and clear them once they're clarified. So you have some key capabilities that are fairly consistent with other database platforms that you might have used for other applications. You have security. So you have administrator access. You've also manage your user access. So certain users are going to have access to certain capabilities in the database. And then finally, you can lock your studies at certain times. And it's necessary to do this during the course of the trial because we may need to freeze data, and then that allows us to lock out users so that they can't make any changes to it. And then we may want to go ahead and make a snapshot of that data set and do some analysis on it. Then once we've done that, we can then unfreeze it and allow users to have access to it so they can continue with their work. Another key capability is the data extraction and reporting capability that's part of our database. We want to be able to extract data using some third-party reporting and extraction tools. A couple of these, some of these you may be familiar with. JReview is a very popular data extraction tool. Also Business Objects and Crystal Reports is one that if you have some IT experience, you more than likely have run across at least a couple of these products at some point in the past. But we want to be able to not only collect our data and clean it, but we want to be able to extract it into a format that we can use. And then finally, we want to be able to create an analyzable data set. And in most cases, we're going to be using products like SAS that some of you are familiar with. These are statistical analysis tools. Of course, SAS is right here in our local area. It's the largest privately held software company in the world and produces basically the standard for statistical analysis tools. Some other capabilities that we want to have, we want to be able to load external data. In other words, data that comes from, say, a vendor, which would be maybe a laboratory might have lab data that we want to load into our database. We might have, say, ECG data that comes from an external company, an external source, that we want to load that into our database. So we want to have that capability so that we don't have to load everything in there ourselves. We can do that in an automatic fashion. We also need to have support for some of the popular coding dictionaries that we're going to use. For example, Medra and Whodrug are ones that we're going to study a little later in our course. Medra is the medical dictionary for regulatory affairs, and it's used to validate medical terminology. So any kind of diagnosis codes or medical terms, we'll use that dictionary to work with them. We'll also have Whodrug, which is the World Health Organization Drug Dictionary. So that's a composite dictionary of all the medications around the world with names and how they're categorized with drug classes and whatnot. And we'll be studying those as we go along. And then finally, we want to have support for electronic data capture, which allows us to enter data and then allows us to clean that data via the query process as we move along through our trial. So at this point, we have a funny little video for you to take a look at. It's about 4 minutes. It's kind of similar to the one you watched earlier, but take a look at it because I think it kind of shares some of the funny aspects to data management. So just copy that link into your browser and pull it up. It's only about 4 minutes long. So this is a screenshot of what the discrepancy view looks like in Oracle Clinical. So if you look up at the top, you've got some information there about the discrepancy itself. You'll see there's a patient number. There's also a visit. So you can quickly identify what visit this occurred at. And then there's also a DCM name, which is a data collection module. You'll see on that little box it says VS, so it's that means vital signs. So it's a vital signs page, and you can see in the comment field, you can't see the entire text there, but that would be the comment field that pulls in from our edit specifications document, and you can see there and underneath the window that says current, where it has review, it indicates that it is in review. So somebody is reviewing that and deciding whether or not we need to send that out to the site for them to clarify. So as you move down to the lower portion, you'll see information that's related to the name of the investigator, and there's also a study site number and a few other pieces of information. Over on the right side, where there is a discrepancy ID, you'll see that number. It's about a 9-digit number there. That number is a unique identifier, so that uniquely identifies that particular edit check that's fired. And so if we ever had to go back and find that, we could very easily just enter that number and it'll take us directly to that. So this is kind of what the Oracle Clinical Data screen looks like. Here's another view of a similar screen. We can see up at the top in that sort of top area there where we've got a patient number. We also have a visit. In this case, it says the first dose visit. It also indicates what page it's on. And we can see there where this particular query has been closed because it says closed in the review field. And then it also indicates what the resolution was. In other words, how was it resolved? And the resolution is data change. Ordinarily, we'd want to see something in that resolution comment field, which is there just to the right of the resolution field. We might want to write a comment in there that indicates what the change was. That way, somebody going back and looking at it would very easily be able to identify that. So let's talk a little bit about Oracle Clinical. Again, this is one of the popular databases that I mentioned earlier. And it has some features that are a little bit different from some of the other databases. But essentially, we have a discrepancy database that houses all of our queries that have fired. So as I told you in some of the previous lectures and in the labs, that over the course of our trial, depending on its complexity and depending on the number of patients and the number of sites, we could have tens of thousands of queries that fire. It would not be unusual, for a trial to have 50 or 60 or 70,000 queries to fire during the course of the trial. So all of these in Oracle are going to be housed in that discrepancy database. And then your data review is actually done directly in the discrepancy database, and it does not require an extraction tool such as JReview to pull it out and then dump it in an Excel spreadsheet. So that's kind of a unique feature of Oracle Clinical. So you have unreviewed discrepancies. These are the ones that fire, and we haven't reviewed them yet. And then once we review them, we can set them to either investigator review, which means we're going to send a data clarification form out to the site, or they could be resolved. In other words, they're closed. Or we might want to set them to passive review. And what that does is it kind of puts them in a holding pattern. And then it may be related to another query, and we really want to know the answer to that one. And that may determine whether or not we can actually close the first query that we've set at passive review. Then the DCF resolution occurs in the DCF database, and that results in a resolution status of either no action, we don't have to do anything, or the investigator clarified or made a change to the data, or we needed to requery it. So we've got kind of two separate databases going on there. Obviously, the DCF database is going to have a whole lot fewer entries in it than the discrepancies, because only a small portion of the discrepancies are actually going to go out to the site for clarification. A couple of the issues that are related to Oracle Clinical that I think kind of in some ways may limit it a little bit is that the user has to navigate back and forth between the discrepancy database and the DCF database and actually the data entry or update mode. Many of the trials that, at least with my experience with it, have been paper trials which require a lot of data entry on the part of the data management person. Also, some of the internal comments section allows you to record notes on the discrepancy that's only reviewed by internal users, and that can actually be a nice feature, because we can write on there certain comments for someone who may be reviewing that discrepancy a little bit later. Requeries can be very cumbersome to complete and require some navigation back and forth between the discrepancy and the DCF databases. So those are some of the issues that you may encounter if you're using that product. So going back to our data management tasks, you've seen this before in some of the other lectures. We'll just kind of touch on this a little bit more with respect to our database. Of course, if you look along the top, we've got the build and validate the database stage, and then also develop our data management plan. We want to create and test our edit checks. Those are the programs that are going to fire that find all the errors in the data. Then as we move down into the bottom row there, now we're getting into the study itself. So the patients are coming in for visits, we're filling out case report forms, we're entering data into our database. Either the data management staff may do that, or the site staff may do it if it's an electronic data capture study. And then we start to run those edit checks and find all the discrepancies. So then we're going to query and resolve queries and all of that, and then we're finally going to get our data into a suitable data set that's clean, and then we're going to lock it, and we're going to run some analysis on it. So these are all the tasks that are associated with that, and we've talked about these before, but I do think it's a good idea to kind of go back through them again and see, kind of refresh your memory a little bit on those. So we wouldn't have a clinical trial if it wasn't highly regulated. And one of the primary regulations that we encounter in our data management work is actually 21 CFR Part 11. I've included the link down below where you can get access to that. It's just these are the FDA regulations that govern computerized systems, and the intent of it is to reduce fraud while providing a basic framework for ensuring that data is secure, accurate, and collected properly. It's not a very lengthy regulation. It's only about 8 or 9 pages. So I want you to pull that up and just kind of scan through it. And I want you to pay close attention to the discussion of electronic signatures and also some of the requirements of a closed system. So we have to make sure that any computerized system that we're using to create or to collect and analyze data, that it meets these requirements. Otherwise, if it can't be validated, then most likely the FDA is not going to be able to use our data because it can't be validated. So take a look at that, and I'm going to go over a few additional things on that in just a moment. So in addition to 21 CFR Part 11, the FDA also publishes guidance for use of computerized systems. It's a 13-page document. I've posted it on Blackboard. However, I've also included the link down below that you can get access to it if you can't get it off of Blackboard. But it's basically a 13-page document that discusses the key attributes of computerized systems. Some of the things that we've been talking about so far, that these systems, they have to be able to limit access. So one of the ways that you do that is by you deploying user IDs and passwords. They also need to have audit trails so that we can identify the time and place of any changes to the data and who made the change. We also need to be able to produce a date and time stamp. So any data that's entered into that database, it needs to be date and time stamped automatically so that we know when and where it occurred and who did it. So those are some of the key elements of the computerized system. So please take a look at that document as we go through the lecture. So I hope you've had a chance to take a look at 21 CFR Part 11, just an 8 or 9 page document on the FDA website. So FDA's 21 CFR Part 11 states that a computerized system handling clinical trial data should be under control. In other words, user access should be tightly controlled. We need to know who has access, when they have access, and what elements of our computerized system they have access to. Clinical data management systems are meant to be closed systems in which access is controlled by the persons responsible for the data in that system. So that would be certainly a characteristic of a control system, would be able to limit the number of people and the type of people that we're going to have access to the data. So what are some of the properties of a closed computer system? Well, first, it has to be validated, which means the system is tested and the results are documented and can distinguish between invalid or altered data. It also needs to be able to create readable electronic files. By readable, that means that a human could look at it and tell what that file is, what kind of data is stored in that file. It also needs to be accessible only by authorized individuals. Obviously, we're going to do that by using user IDs and passwords. And then finally, it needs to be able to secure and protect data. So it needs to be able to be backed up. It needs to run in a secure server room or somewhere in the cloud, was where many of them are now. But that environment needs to be secure. So it's not going to be prone to being hacked into. Not going to be available for just anybody to take a look at. It also needs to be able to record who did what and when. So it needs to be able to produce an audit trail so that we know exactly what data was entered and when it was entered. It needs to control the process steps, such as performing certain steps in order. For example, second pass entry only occurs after first pass entry. So that would be a key element of a closed system. It also needs to be able to limit access privileges, so only certain people can do certain functions. in your database. And then you've got authorized users that need to be trained, and they need to be deemed qualified. So we don't just let anybody be turned loose in there. We make sure that they're trained and can do the work before we allow access for them. Then also we have to have controls for system documentation, which would include access, modifications, maintenance, etc. So we've got to be able to control those things as well. Electronic signatures. These are one of the key components for 21 CFR Part 11, and I hope that you read about those as you look through that particular regulation. But it's important to understand that the FDA considers electronic signatures to be valid, and they consider them to have the same legal authority as a handwritten signature. So a couple of characteristics: they have to be digitally assigned to specific persons. Most of the ones that you'll see will have the person's name on it, and it will have what appears to be what looks like a handwritten signature, a little graphic on there. And then, as I said before, it's considered the same as a handwritten signature, has the same legal authority. It has to be validated, and it has to contain an expiration date. So once a company gives one to a user, it usually is going to have an expiration date after which it'll run out and needs to be reissued. And then finally, they're password protected. That's the primary security means on the electronic signature. So in summary, a clinical data management system under control means that the system contains authentic, reliable data which is kept confidential and cannot easily be rejected as not genuine. So the system consistently does what it should do, and the users know how to use it. So these would be all elements of a clinical database management system. So hopefully our systems are going to meet these criteria. The ones that I mentioned earlier certainly do. So many of you will wind up one day working in that kind of environment, so you'll be confident that your clinical data management system meets those criteria. Then finally, you have a reading assignment out of your textbook. Read Chapter 19, which discusses clinical data management systems. And also I'd like for you to take a look at the guidance for industry that the FDA puts out that discusses computerized systems used in clinical investigations. So once you've done that, then finally we have a discussion board, discussion forum topic. So that topic is going to be named and discuss 2 strategies that you could deploy to ensure that your site or company complies with 21 CFR Part 11 requirements. And I'll put a link out there to CFR Part 11 online, so you'll see that. It's only about 7 pages, so I don't expect you to read it carefully, but just kind of look through it and be sure you're familiar with the content. I've discussed it here, but I think I would like for you to take a look at it, the actual document, and look at it there.